The sun hung merciless above the New Mexico desert, a burning eye that saw everything and forgave nothing. Heat waves danced across the red earth like spirits, distorting the distant mesas into wavering mirages. Above, a hawk circled lazily, its shadow fleeting across the scorched ground, the only movement in a landscape that seemed frozen in time. Clara Morrison pressed herself against a boulder, its surface hot enough to burn through her torn dress. She didn't care about the pain. Pain meant she was still alive, still moving, still ahead of him. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps, each one tasting of dust and desperation. The canteen at her hip held maybe 3 swallows of water, warm as blood and twice as precious. She'd been running for 2 days now, or was it 3? Time blurred under the endless assault of sun and fear. Her feet, once soft from a teacher's life in Colorado, were now raw and bleeding inside boots never meant for this kind of journey. Each step sent fire shooting up her legs, but stopping meant death, or, worse, going back. The bruises on her arms had turned from purple to yellow-green, a sickly rainbow marking where Samuel's hands had gripped too tight, held too long. Her wrists still bore the rope burns from that last night, when he tied her to the bedpost after catching her trying to leave. She touched them gently, remembering his words. "If you try to run again, Clara, I'll hunt you down like the animal you are. There ain't nowhere in this territory you can hide from me." But she had run anyway. Better to die free in the desert than live another day in that ranch house that had become her prison. Clara forced herself to move, knowing that every minute spent resting was a minute Samuel gained on her. He would be coming. She knew him well enough to know that his pride wouldn't let him suffer the humiliation of a runaway wife. In the 3 years since their wedding, she'd watched him track wolves, mountain lions, even Apache raiders with a patience that bordered on obsession. He enjoyed the hunt almost as much as the kill. The landscape offered little comfort or concealment. Scattered mesquite and greasewood dotted the flatland, their thorny branches providing meager shade. In the distance, red rock formations rose like ancient sentinels, but they seemed to retreat with every painful step she took toward them. The desert was vast and unforgiving, a place where the unprepared died quickly and the prepared died slowly. Clara had neither preparation nor supplies. She'd fled with only what she wore, a calico dress now torn and stained with sweat and blood, and the few items she'd managed to grab, the nearly empty canteen, a pocketknife that had belonged to her father, and a small cloth bag containing 2 biscuits hard as stones and a handful of dried beans. It wasn't enough to sustain a rabbit, let alone a woman trying to cross 60 miles of badlands to reach the nearest town. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her tongue swollen with thirst. She knew the signs of heat sickness, the dizziness, the confusion, the gradual shutdown of the body's will to continue. Already dark spots danced at the edges of her vision, and her hands trembled with more than fear. A memory surfaced unbidden, standing before her classroom in Colorado Springs, teaching the Morrison children their letters. She'd been Miss Clara Hensley then, independent and proud, with dreams of maybe opening her own school someday. The children had loved her gentle ways and patient instruction. Parents had spoken of her with respect. She'd had a small room above the mercantile, her own money, her own life. Then Samuel Morrison had ridden into town. Tall, handsome, with money from his cattle empire, and a smile that made the other women jealous when he chose to court the schoolteacher. He'd been charming then, bringing her wildflowers and books of poetry, speaking of the grand ranch he'd built for her in New Mexico territory. She'd been 23, and foolish enough to believe that love could bloom in the desert just as easily as in the mountains. The sun had shifted westward, casting longer shadows across the sand. Clara knew she needed to find shelter soon. Desert nights could be as cruel as the days, the temperature dropping 40 degrees or more. Without fire or proper clothing, hypothermia was as real a threat as heat stroke. She scanned the horizon desperately, looking for any sign of water or shelter. In the distance, she spotted what might be a line of cottonwoods, trees that grew only near water. Hope flickered in her chest, fragile as a candle flame in wind. But it was so far, and her legs felt like they were made of water themselves, barely able to support her weight. Behind her, somewhere in that vast expanse of nothing, Samuel would be coming. She could almost see him in her mind's eye, sitting tall in the saddle, his gray eyes cold as winter stone, that Colt .45 hanging loose at his hip. He'd have supplies, water, probably one of the Apache trackers he sometimes employed. He'd be patient, methodical, following her trail like reading a book. "You belong to me." He told her that the first time she'd tried to speak up about his drinking, about the violent turns his temper took. "Everything you are, everything you have, everything you'll ever be, it's mine by law and by God." Clara stumbled over a loose stone, catching herself before she fell. She couldn't afford to fall, couldn't afford the precious energy it would take to rise again. The cottonwood seemed no closer, dancing in the heat like a cruel mirage. Her mind began to play tricks. She thought she heard horses, thought she saw riders cresting the distant hills. But when she blinked, there was only empty land and endless sky. She thought of her mother, dead these 5 years now, who'd warned her about marrying a man she'd known only 3 months. "The desert changes people, Clara," she'd said. "It strips away pretense, shows what's really underneath. Make sure you know what's under that handsome face before you say yes." But Clara had been in love, or thought she had been. And Samuel had seemed so different then, so eager to please, so full of plans for their future. It wasn't until after the wedding, after he'd taken her to that isolated ranch 50 miles from the nearest neighbor, that she'd learned what the desert had already known. Samuel Morrison was a man who needed to own things completely, and what he owned, he had the right to break. The sun touched the western mountains now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if Clara had eyes for anything but survival. She forced herself forward, one step, then another, her world shrinking to the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. The cottonwoods were real. She could see individual branches now, hear the whisper of leaves in the evening breeze. Just a little farther, just a little more. But her body had other ideas. Her knees buckled without warning, sending her sprawling into the dust. She lay there for a moment, cheek pressed to the still warm earth, tasting sand and defeat. This was how the desert claimed its victims, not in some dramatic final moment, but in the quiet surrender of flesh pushed beyond endurance. "Get up," she whispered to herself, the words barely audible. "Get up, Clara." But her limbs wouldn't obey. The darkness at the edges of her vision was spreading, and somewhere in that darkness she thought she heard her mother singing the lullabies of her childhood. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad, dying here, better than what waited for her if Samuel found her alive. She closed her eyes, ready to let the desert take her. That's when she felt it, a vibration in the ground, rhythmic and growing stronger. Horses. Her eyes snapped open, adrenaline giving her the strength to turn her head. There, silhouetted against the dying light, a rider approached. But something was wrong with the picture. This wasn't Samuel's familiar form, wasn't the rigid posture of a man who'd learned to ride in eastern stables. This rider moved like water, flowing with the horse's motion as if they were one creature. And he was coming fast. Too fast. Clara tried to rise, tried to run, but her body had nothing left to give. She could only watch as the rider drew closer, could only wait to learn whether the desert had sent her salvation or simply a different form of doom. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was a face that belonged to no white man, angular features carved by wind and sun, eyes the color of amber, and an expression that might have been concern or might have been something else entirely. Then there was nothing but the vast silence of the desert and the first cold stars beginning to pierce the darkening sky. Kanayati had been tracking the woman for 6 hours, reading her story in the disturbed sand and broken mesquite branches. She moved like prey, zigzagging without purpose, doubling back on her own trail, leaving signs of panic everywhere she passed. But there was something else in those tracks, something that made him continue following when wisdom said to turn away. Determination. Despite the blood drops that spotted the sand, despite the stumbling gait that grew more pronounced with each mile, she kept moving forward. He'd first noticed her trail at dawn while hunting antelope near Coyote Ridge. Fresh tracks heading into the worst part of the desert, made by a woman's boots. City boots from the look of them, with heels meant for boardwalks, not sand. No horse tracks accompanied them, no pack marks. Just a lone woman walking into death's embrace. Koa had almost turned away then. The desert claimed many fools, and he'd learned long ago that interfering with fate brought nothing but trouble. His Apache grandfather would have said the spirits had already marked her path. His Mexican mother would have crossed herself and whispered prayers for the woman's soul. But something in those tracks held him. Maybe the way she'd paused to tear strips from her dress to wrap her bleeding feet, or how she'd circled back to check if she was being followed. This wasn't just foolishness. This was desperation. Now, watching her crumpled form from a distant ridge, he weighed his options. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Night would bring cold that could kill as surely as the day's heat. She hadn't moved in several minutes, though he could see the slight rise and fall of her chest. Still alive. But for how long? Koa touched the medicine pouch at his throat, feeling the sacred items within, a piece of turquoise from his mother's homeland, an eagle feather from his first vision quest, and a small silver cross that had belonged to his father. 3 bloodlines flowed in his veins: Apache warrior, Mexican horseman, and through his father's mother, pale-skinned settlers who called themselves American. He belonged fully to none and partially to all, walking between worlds like the shadow he'd trained himself to be. The woman stirred, trying to rise. Even from this distance, he could see the bruises marking her arms, the rope burns on her wrists. He'd seen such marks before, on Apache women taken by soldiers, on Mexican girls sold to Comancheros. Someone had held this woman against her will, someone she'd risked the desert to escape. That changed things. Koa clicked his tongue softly, and his horse, a paint stallion with one blue eye, moved forward without need of reins. They descended the ridge, like smoke flowing downhill, making no more sound than wind through grass. The woman must have sensed something because she turned her head, eyes widening with terror as she saw him approach. He stopped 20 feet away, dismounting in one fluid motion. She tried to scramble backward, but her body betrayed her, limbs refusing to cooperate. He could see her more clearly now. Pale skin burned red by sun, hair the color of corn silk, tangled and matted with dust. Eyes blue as the mountain lakes of his mother's stories. Young, maybe 25 summers, with the soft look of someone who'd never known hardship until recently. "Please," she whispered. Voice cracked as dried leather. "Please, I have nothing." Koa remained still, reading her the way he'd read her tracks. Fear dominated, but underneath lay that same determination. She wouldn't beg for life. This one had pride, even broken as she was. Moving slowly, he pulled his water skin from the saddle and approached. She watched him like a rabbit watches a coyote, ready to bolt if her body would allow it. When he knelt beside her and offered the water, she hesitated, suspicion warring with desperate thirst. "Drink," he said, his voice carrying the musical cadence of his mother's Spanish, mixed with the harder consonants of Apache. "The desert has already taken enough from you." She reached for the skin with shaking hands, but couldn't hold it steady. Without thinking, he supported it for her, letting her drink in small sips. His grandfather had taught him that kindness to strangers brought either great blessing or great curse. Looking at this woman, he wondered which she would prove to be. "Who did this to you?" The words came out before he could stop them, his fingers ghosting near but not touching, the bruises on her arms. She pulled back, defensive walls slamming up to spite her weakness. "I fell," she said, the lie as transparent as spring water. Koa studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. Everyone had their secrets. The desert would reveal truth in its own time. He stood, decision made. "You'll die here," he said matter-of-factly. "Tonight, when the cold comes. Or tomorrow, when the sun returns. The coyotes are already gathering." Quote, She followed his gaze to the distant shapes slinking between the shadows. "Maybe that's better," she whispered, and something in her tone made his chest tighten unexpectedly. "Death is never better," he said, repeating words his mother had spoken during the cholera outbreak that had nearly claimed her. "Death is just ending. Life is possibility." He moved back to his horse, untying the blanket rolled behind his saddle. The woman watched him with confused weariness as he returned and wrapped it around her shoulders. The wool smelled of smoke and horse and wild herbs he used to keep insects away. "I can't pay you," she said, clutching the blanket like it might be snatched away. "Did I ask for payment?" He crouched beside her again, this time checking her feet. The boots were ruined, the leather stiff with blood. Through the holes, he could see raw flesh that would fester by morning if not tended. These must come off. "No," she jerked back, then gasped at the pain the movement caused. "I need them. I have to keep going." "Going where?" He gestured at the empty desert stretching in every direction. "The nearest town is 3 days. Riding, you wouldn't make 3 hours." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "I can't go back. I won't go back." "I didn't say back," Koa said calmly. "I said off." He waited, patient as stone, until she finally nodded. As gently as his hands knew how, he worked the boots free. Her feet were worse than he expected. Blistered, torn, already showing signs of infection. She bit her lip hard enough to draw blood, but made no sound. From his saddlebag, he retrieved healing supplies, traditional Apache remedies mixed with Mexican herbs and a few modern medicines traded from American merchants. His hands worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning wounds, applying poultices, wrapping her feet in soft deer hide. "You're Indian," she said. "Not quite a question." "Apache," he confirmed, then added, "and Mexican, and a quarter white, if bloodlines matter to you." She shook her head slightly. "I used to think they did, back when I thought I understood the world." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I was a teacher. I thought I knew things." "Teachers are sacred to my mother's people," he said, tying off the last bandage. "They preserve wisdom, pass it to the next generation." "I taught children their letters and numbers," she said. "Nothing sacred about that." "You taught them to read the world." "How is that not sacred?" She looked at him then, really looked, as if seeing him for the first time. He wondered what she saw. The Apache warrior trained to kill silently in darkness, the Mexican vaquero who could gentle wild horses with whispered words, or the part of him that belonged to neither world fully. Her scrutiny made him uncomfortable, in a way enemy rifles never had. The sun had vanished behind the western mountains, leaving only afterglow. The temperature was already dropping, and he could see her beginning to shiver despite the blanket. Decision time. He could give her supplies, point her toward town, and ride away. That would be the wise choice. The safe choice. But wisdom and safety had never been his strongest guides. "Can you ride?" he asked. Hope flickered in her eyes, quickly suppressed. "Yes, I could if—" He was already moving, adjusting his saddle, making room. When he turned back, hand extended, she hesitated again. "Where?" The single word carried volumes of fear and desperate need. "There's a place," he said carefully. "Hidden. Safe. Water, shelter, food. You can rest, heal, decide your next path." "Why?" Her voice broke on the word. "Why would you help me?" Koa considered the question, not sure he knew the answer himself. Maybe it was the determination in her tracks, the refusal to surrender even when surrender seemed the only option. Maybe it was the bruises that reminded him of other women, other times when he'd turned away and later wished he hadn't. Or maybe it was something in her eyes, a wildness that the desert recognized as kin. "Because the one who did this to you," he said finally, "he's wrong. You don't belong to him. The desert has claimed you now, and the desert protects its own." She stared at him for a long moment, then placed her hand in his. Her skin was soft despite the sun damage, her grip stronger than he expected. He lifted her easily. She weighed nothing, bones of a bird, and settled her in front of him on the paint stallion. "My name is Clara." she whispered as his arms came around her to take the reins. Clara Morrison, though I suppose that doesn't matter anymore. Names always matter, he said, clicking to set the horse in motion. They carry power, tell stories. But if you need a new one, the desert will provide. She leaned back against him, whether from exhaustion or trust, he couldn't tell. Her hair smelled of dust and fierce sweat, but underneath he caught a hint of something else. Lavender, maybe. Civilization clinging to her even here. They rode in silence as stars emerged overhead, the ancient patterns his grandfather had taught him to read. The horse knew the way, picking a path through rocks and thorns with the sureness of long practice. Koa felt the woman, Clara, relaxing against him incrementally, exhaustion finally overwhelming fear. He is large and full of bones. Many men have vanished here thinking themselves hunters. She shivered, and he couldn't tell if it was from cold or memory. You don't know him. Samuel Morrison owns the largest ranch in 3 counties. He has money, men, influence. He's friends with the territorial governor. And yet, Koa said, his wife runs barefoot through the desert to escape him. He guided the horse down a narrow deer trail visible only by moonlight. Power built on fear is like a house built on sand. It looks strong until the first real storm. They were entering canyon country now, the walls rising around them like protective arms. Clara had gone quiet, and he thought she might have fallen asleep until she spoke again. I dream sometimes that I'm back in Colorado, teaching school, free to walk where I please without asking permission. Her voice carried a longing sharp as any blade. Foolish dreams. No dream of freedom is foolish, he said, thinking of his own people. Forced onto reservations, told where they could ride and where they couldn't. Sometimes dreams are all that keep us alive. Quote, the horse's hooves echoed off stone as they entered a narrow canyon that seemed to lead nowhere. But Koa knew its secrets, knew the hidden turn that revealed a passage barely wide enough for a rider, knew the ancient handholds carved by his ancestors that allowed access to the valley beyond. Close your eyes, he told Clara as they approached the passage. Trust me. She tensed, then deliberately relaxed, choosing trust over fear. It moved something in him, that small act of faith. The passage was dark as a cave, branches scraping at them from both sides, but then they emerged into moonlight again, and Clara's soft gasp told him she saw what he'd wanted her to see. The hidden valley spread before them like a secret jewel, grass silver in the moonlight, the musical sound of running water, cottonwoods whispering promises of shade and safety. Along the far wall, ancient drawings told stories of his people's time here before the white men came, before the world changed. It's beautiful, Clara breathed, and he heard tears in her voice. It's sanctuary, he corrected, guiding the horse toward the small adobe structure built against the canyon wall. Not his work, but maintained by him, a shelter for those who needed it. For tonight, tomorrow, as long as necessary. As he lifted her down from the horse, her hands gripped his shoulders for balance, and their eyes met. In that moment, he saw past the fear and exhaustion to something else, a spark that refused to be extinguished, a strength that bruises and brutality hadn't broken. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, he replied, surprised by the roughness in his own voice. The desert extracts a price for its protection. You may find it higher than you're willing to pay. But even as he said it, looking into those eyes blue as mountain lakes, Koa suspected the price might be extracted from him as well. The spirits worked in mysterious ways, and bringing this broken bird to his sanctuary would have consequences he couldn't yet foresee. For now, though, there was water to fetch and a fire to build, wounds to tend, and a woman to keep alive through the cold desert night. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, including the certainty that Samuel Morrison would come hunting. But tonight, in this hidden valley where ancient spirits still danced, a woman named Clara would sleep safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. And a man caught between worlds would stand guard, already knowing he would place himself between her and whatever darkness followed her trail. Wait, before we move on. What do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. Clara woke to the sound of water over stone and the scent of wood smoke. For a moment, confusion held her. This wasn't the ranch house with its heavy oak furniture and suffocating silence. Then memory rushed back. The desert, the collapse, strong arms lifting her onto a horse. She sat up too quickly, gasping as pain shot through her abused body. Slowly, came a quiet voice from the doorway. Koa stood, silhouetted against the morning light, a steaming cup in his hand. Your body has been through much. It needs time to remember how to move without fear. She accepted the cup gratefully, some kind of tea that tasted of herbs and honey. The warmth spread through her, chasing away the last cobwebs of sleep. In daylight, she could see the shelter properly. Adobe walls worn smooth by countless years, a fireplace built into one corner, simple furniture that looked handmade. Clean, sparse, but somehow welcoming. How long did I sleep? Through the night and into morning, the sun is 3 hands high. He moved into the room with that fluid grace she'd noticed before, setting down a plate of food, flatbread, dried meat, some kind of preserved fruit. Eat slowly, your stomach has forgotten fullness. Clara took a small bite, aware of him watching her. In daylight, she could see him more clearly. His face held the angular beauty of his Apache heritage, softened slightly by his other bloodlines. His hair, black as a raven's wing, was tied back with a strip of leather. But it was his eyes, amber and deep, that held her, calm but sharp, like he was always seeing more than he said. This place, she said between careful bites, how do you know about it? Quote, my grandfather's people have known this valley for generations. It's sacred, a place of healing, of refuge. The Spanish never found it. The Americans never found it. He settled cross-legged on the floor, moving with the natural stillness of someone who belonged to the land. Now it serves those who need sanctuary. And you just trust me here? She asked softly. You don't know me. A faint smile touched his lips. I know enough. I know you ran rather than surrender. I know you wrapped your own wounds and kept walking when most would have lain down to die. I know you carry bruises that speak of courage. It takes courage to survive what you survived and still choose escape. Clara looked down at her arms, at the yellowing marks she'd grown so accustomed to hiding. Some would call it foolishness, not courage. Quote, the same could be said of my bringing you here, he said quietly, then stood, moving to a shelf carved into the adobe wall. But sometimes the heart knows truths the mind hasn't learned yet. He returned with fresh bandages and a ceramic pot of salve. Your feet need tending. Clara hesitated, then extended her legs. The deer-hide wrappings were stained with blood and dust. She bit her lip as he unwound them, but his touch was gentler than any she'd known in years. The wounds looked better than she feared. Still raw, but clean, already beginning to heal. This will hurt, he warned, scooping salve onto his fingers. It smelled of pine and something sharper. I'm used to hurt, she said without thinking, then flushed at the admission. His hands stilled for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. No one should be used to hurt. The salve burned, but it was a clean pain, medicinal rather than cruel. Clara found herself studying his face as he worked, the complete concentration he gave to the task. When had someone last touched her with such careful intent to heal rather than harm? There, he said, tying off the last bandage. A few more days, and you'll walk without pain. A week, and you can travel if you choose. Travel where? The question escaped before she could stop it. I have nowhere to go. No money, no family, nothing but the clothes you found me in. The desert teaches us that nothing is just another word for possibility. He cleaned his hands in a bowl of water, movements precise and economical. But those are tomorrow's concerns. Today, you heal. A comfortable silence settled between them as Clara finished eating. Through the open door, she could see the valley beyond. Green grass rippling in the breeze, the stream catching sunlight like scattered diamonds. It seemed impossible that such a place could exist in the harsh landscape she'd crossed. I should know your name, she said suddenly. You saved my life, and I don't even know what to call you. Kanayati, he said. Koa, to my mother's people, Kanayati to my father's." "What does it mean?" Quote, "Koa is crow in the old language. Kanayati means he who wrestles. My grandmother said I was born fighting, the cord wrapped around my neck. She said the spirits marked me as stubborn from the first moment. Stubborn enough to help strange women in the desert. Apparently so." Clara smiled faintly. It felt strange on her face, like a muscle she hadn't used in years. "I should tell you," she said after a while. "My husband, Samuel Morrison, he's not a man who accepts loss. He'll come looking. You said this last night." Koa's expression didn't change. "Let him come." "You don't understand. He has resources, connections. He's hired Apache trackers before for hunting. He knows this country." "He knows the surface of this country," Koa corrected. "There's a difference between knowing where water runs and understanding why it chooses that path. Between seeing tracks and reading the story they tell. Your husband is a man who takes. The desert gives nothing to those who only take." Quote. Clara wanted to argue to make him understand the danger, but something in his calm certainty silenced her. Instead, she asked, "Why do you live out here alone?" "Who says I'm alone?" he replied, gesturing toward the door. "The hawk that nests in the cottonwood, the fox who drinks at dawn, the spirits of my ancestors in the canyon walls. This valley is fuller than any town. But no people," he added with a smile. "People come when they need to, like you." He stood, fluid as wind. "Can you stand?" "There's something you should see." Clara tested her legs carefully. They held, though she had to grip the wall for balance. Koa offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His skin was warm, roughened by sun and work, but his support was steady as stone. He led her outside, moving slowly to match her pace. The morning air carried the sweetness of grass and wildflowers she hadn't noticed in the darkness. The stream ran clearer than any water she'd seen, emerging from rocks at the valley's head and winding between cottonwoods and willows. "Look," he said, pointing to the canyon wall. Clara gasped. In daylight she could see them clearly, ancient drawings covering the rock face. Horses and hunters, spirals and suns, handprints that seemed to reach across centuries. Some were faded by time, others still vibrant with color. "My people's history," Koa explained. "This was a gathering place long before the Spanish came. Warriors came here before battle to seek visions. Women came to give birth. The dying came to pass peacefully from one world to the next." "It's beautiful," Clara whispered. "Like a book written on the world itself." "You understand," he said softly. "Not everyone sees it. Some look and see only primitive drawings." "I was a teacher," Clara reminded him. "I know stories matter, however they're told." They stood quietly together. Clara, aware of his steady presence beside her, felt a strange sense of peace. Safe. The word drifted through her mind. It felt foreign after so long. "There's a pool further up," Koa said at last, "fed by a hot spring. It would ease your pain." Clara hesitated. "My dress?" "There are clothes in the shelter," he said simply. "Things left by others who pass through. The desert doesn't care what we wear, only that we survive." An hour later, Clara lowered herself into the natural pool, gasping at the warmth that enveloped her. She wore a simple shift Koa had found, soft and clean. He'd withdrawn to give her privacy, but she could see him in the distance tending his horse. His presence was a comfort rather than a threat. The water worked its magic on her battered body, unknotting muscles she hadn't realized were clenched. Steam rose around her, scented with minerals and thyme. She let her head fall back, her hair floating like water weeds, and for the first time in 3 years, felt the possibility of being clean, not just in body but in spirit. When she finally emerged, she found Koa waiting by the stream. He looked up as she approached, something flickering in those amber eyes before his expression returned to calm. "Better?" he asked. "Much," she said, smiling genuinely this time. "I feel almost human again." Quote, "Human is a good start," he said, turning toward the shelter. "Tomorrow, we'll talk about what comes next." She hesitated, then asked quietly, "Why are you helping me?" He stopped and faced her fully. Because when I was 12, soldiers came to our camp. My mother hid me in the brush and told me to run. I didn't. I watched. I watched what they did to make her talk, watched her die still refusing. She died free, making her own choice. That's why I help you, Clara Morrison. Because I know the look of someone choosing freedom over safety. Choosing the unknown over the unendurable. Her throat tightened, and she looked away, blinking hard. If he comes. When he comes, Koa corrected gently, he'll find that some things can't be taken by force. Some things can only be given or kept. The promise in his voice wrapped around her like armor. Clara closed her eyes, feeling tears slip free. Not from fear this time, but from something else. Relief, maybe. Hope. The sensation was so unfamiliar she barely recognized it. When she opened her eyes again, Koa was gone, but his presence lingered. Through the window she could see him moving through the valley, checking snares, gathering herbs, maintaining the hidden paths that kept this place secret. For the first time in years, Clara felt something deeper than gratitude. Faith. Faith in the desert. Faith in herself. And faith in the man who had promised, with quiet certainty, that he would stand between her and whatever darkness followed. And though she didn't yet know it, before the week was over, Samuel Morrison would ride into that very canyon, bringing the past crashing into their fragile peace and forcing Koa to make good on his warning. Touch her again, and I'll bury you here.